And then again, I would say that the best of Jewish culture is bound to the fact of being dispersed, polycentric. The history of the diaspora has been a history of persecution, but also of interethnic exchange and relations. In other words, a school for tolerance, end quote. So I've gone on a bit too long. All right, and let me close and return to Levi again. Felicitous. Strange. I'm enjoying the dissonance a lot. He understood the Holocaust, Levi did, to provide a moral framework for his own criticisms of Israel. And he wouldn't listen to those who said that in his position he ought to remain silent. At least he wouldn't listen for a long time. On the eve of his departure to revisit Auschwitz in 1982, to commemorate it, he signed the open letter in La Repubblica calling for the withdrawal of Israeli troops from Lebanon. He refused to understand the Israeli army as representing a persecuted minority. The discourse of persecution could not be used for such a purpose, and over and against those who would revive the images of the camps to authorize Israeli aggression, he wrote provocatively in Il Manifesto, "Everybody is somebody's Jew, and today the Palestinians are the Jews of the Israelis," end quote. Of course, this is a controversial claim, and I think we have to finally reject it as an unwise formulation. After all, if Levi says that the Palestinians are the Jews of the Israelis, he's transposing the victimized position of the Jews under the Nazis to the victimized position of the Palestinians under the Israelis. But I think that this is a crude and cynical use of a Holocaustal resonance, precisely the kind I'm arguing against. But consider that he's also saying that just as the Jew is persecuted under the Nazis, so others can be in the position of being persecuted, and if we equate the Jew with the persecuted, then today others can be Jews, including Palestinians. Further, Israelis, understood as the Israeli government, are not the same as Jews. When asked later about his controversial formulation, he made clear that he did not think that Begin and Sharon were Nazis, okay? And in response to yet another interviewer who came after him, after he made this outrageous formulation, from La Repubblica, that interviewer asked, "Are the Palestinians in the same position as the Jews under the Nazis? Say it again, won't you?" He replied that he didn't accept such simplistic analogies and that there was no policy he knew of to exterminate the Palestinians. When after Sabra and Shatila, he joined with other Italian and Jewish intellectuals to ask both Begin and Sharon to resign, he was also horrified by the anti-Semitic slogans that suddenly appeared on the walls of his town, Turin, equating Jews with Nazis. Okay, so his words came back to him on the walls of the town, and he was, I think fair to say, flooded with remorse. This was for him a radically untenable situation, and it produced for him a conflict. Could he continue to elaborate those principles, as he understood them, derived from his experience of Auschwitz, to condemn state violence without contributing to an anti-Semitic seizure of the event? This was the issue he had to negotiate. Within a few months of these anti-Semitic slogans appearing on the walls of his town, Levi fell silent on the issue and even descended into a serious depression, one that doubtless had several causes, but could not have been helped by the impasse that was before him. His political predicament is not far from our own, I want to say, since to speak at all against Israeli policies can excite those who would condemn not only Israel but Jews more generally in the spirit of anti-Semitism. So is this a reason not to speak? Or does it mean that when and if we speak, we have to speak against that anti-Semitism at the same time that we articulate moral and political objections to wanton state violence? Similarly, if we say that the Holocaust is deployed for the purposes of justifying state and military actions, we must also say that the Holocaust is not reducible to that deployment, and that it devalues and effaces the specific suffering and political challenge of the Holocaust to make such a reduction. Levi spoke out in 1982, then softened his remarks, often then saying he would only give interviews on the condition that the interviewer not bring up Israel. Something traumatic had to be set aside, and neither Levi nor any other individual could remake the political lexicon within which he was compelled to live and speak. But we know that muteness is no answer, and that in this way his situation bids us not to follow him there. When asked whether he hated Germans, Levi said that he didn't believe one should or could categorize an entire people on the basis of their national character. When asked about his alleged insensitivity to the loss of Jewish blood, he responded that Jewish blood ought not to be privileged over any other. And then his final word on the topic, we must not allow the sufferings of the Holocaust to justify everything. And if this simple sentence cannot be uttered, he did utter it, it was in fact his last public utterance on the topic, then we are doubtless learning the wrong lesson from the atrocities of the concentration camps, namely the lesson that we must not speak, that needless is the only alternative. All right, well, that's the end of my, my formal remarks, and it seems to me that I just want to throw out a couple of questions, which I'm still grappling with as I try to work through a final version of this. If it becomes imperative to remain silent, not criticize Israel for fear of an anti-Semitic reaction, and it seems to me that we fail to criticize a certain kind of state violence, that the history of anti-Semitism demands that we criticize. Right, because of anti-Semitism, I must criticize state violence. If I fail to criticize state violence, I am failing to learn the lesson I must learn from anti-Semitism. If we then criticize state violence and anti-Semitism seizes upon the critique, we have to obviously oppose that anti-Semitism as well. Either we say nothing, or we speak in two directions at the same time, and there seems to be no other choice than to speak in both directions at the same time. Second problem I have is how to safeguard something called the Shoah against its redeployment, both in favor of Israeli policy as a legitimating technique or a legitimating effect, how to safeguard the Shoah against those who would criticize Israel and allege that Israel is the same as Nazism. How would we retrieve this Shoah from its deployments? And is it possible not to deploy it? And can I argue coherently against its deployment? Can I say it must remain useless? Do not use it. It can't be used. It seems like I can't say that if I'm saying I want to derive a certain kind of social political framework from it that would oppose forcible detention and arrest. I am using it. Is there a better and worse use? Is there any way to stand apart from use? The fact that it is trauma, that it remains trauma, both compels and defeats any account we might give of it. And is there a way that we might safeguard, oddly enough, this traumatic structure so that when we say the Shoah, we are actually talking about something that is that cannot be resolved into any use, that undercuts any use for which it might be used, exceeds any use to which it might deliberately be put, because it mocks the deliberateness with which we use it. Trauma mocks our deliberateness. Can this vexation, this traumatic vexation, that we are used by what we try to use, that others use what we try to use, become the conditioned possibility for a kind of critique? Is there a critical edge of trauma that limits the utilization of the Shoah? I think maybe I'll just end there.